Hello and welcome to this podcast. Today I am with Mark. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Amy. Nice to see you again.
Hello, it's nice to see you again too. So, today in this podcast, we are going to be talking about sleep and panic.
Okay, good subject.
So, let's get into it. So, are there any environmental factors towards this?
So there's two ways of looking at this. We can look at sleep on its own, or we can look at panic on its own. So for sleep, a good bedtime routine is really important. Keep the room cool, keep the room sort of cozy, nice, heavy blankets and sheets. Um, Switch off those devices, especially the things with blue lights, because this can all disturb sleep. When it comes to panic, panic can be triggered by the things that we go through during the day. So panic usually for me means your anxiety levels getting too high. And when that happens, it just pushes up our anxiety levels again and again until we hit a panic attack or a feeling of panic. But one of the things that can happen is if people's anxiety levels are too high and we panic all the time, that can then disturb sleep. And sleep can be disturbed in lots of ways, but it's common, and we've had this with clients in the past, that they suddenly wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and have a panic attack out of a deep sleep. And it's just, we think the nervous system is just going into overdrive, but we've also got chemical changes that can go on through sort of throughout the day.
Okay. So is it any you go through different sleep cycles. So
hmm
are there any specific sleep cycles you've seen these in them?
We've not examined actually specific sleep cycles. Yes, we believe that we go through sort of 45-minute sleep cycles of different types of sleep. And it could be that the cortisol levels and adrenaline levels are getting too high during sleep. And when we're sort of coming out of that sleep cycle, that it causes that panic attack to go on. It's not something I've studied in depth because I've never been asked to. It's an interesting question. But we'll come to this in a bit. There are quite a few things we can do to improve that sleep and to bring that panic down.
Okay, that's really interesting. So are there any social factors towards this?
With panic, certainly. So if people have social anxiety, which means they may struggle when they go out in big crowds, it might be they struggle when they're meeting new people or they're around people who are a bit loud and boisterous. That can certainly push up our anxiety levels and cause panic. So yes, for an awful lot of people, environmental things can really make a difference, especially sort of the social activity around them.
Okay, that's really interesting. So have you seen any nutritional effects by this?
Nutritional effects as what can help?
So what can cause panic and sleep
Ah,
and what can help it
so
as well?
okay. So poor diet is massively linked to panic and anxiety and sleep problems. And first of all, caffeine. People absolutely love the coffee. Some people plead and say, please, Mark, don't take away my coffee. But coffee's an interesting one in that it's got a 12-hour half-life. So if you have a large cup of coffee at about lunchtime, half of that is still in your system, and as I've mentioned before, about 50% of the population don't metabolize coffee properly, and that can certainly trigger anxiety attacks. And this is another reason why we get people tested with that optimal health test to see if coffee's causing them a problem. There can be lots of other that do it as well. A lot of colas, high caffeine, energy drinks, artificial sweeteners, all are a bit like taking a 240-volt light bulb and putting 1,000 volts through it. And yes, we might feel much better during the day when that's happening, but that can definitely disrupt the sleep and cause the nervous system to be misfiring. So, food, all these additives, these E numbers, these preservatives, all the things we know we shouldn't have, certainly can affect panic and sleep.
So have you seen any biological factors that can contribute to this?
Yes. So, if people have any sort of nerve damage, if they've been through any sort of physical trauma, Somebody I used to work with used to believe that actually we just needed something like a fall, and that could disrupt sleep and panic attacks as well. So yes, and also if you've got people who have disabilities where they're I'm trying to think how to put this nicely. I had a client a while ago who was kind of had some damage to the side of the body, and the body didn't work properly. And it was when we got him recommended to go and see a good chiropractor that the chiropractor can then take bones away from nerves and get things back to normal, and that can make a major improvement.
Oh wow, that's really interesting. Have you seen anybody who like has found it like in like a genetic influence? So like somebody else in the family had panic in their sleep and then that caused them to have panic in their sleep too.
Sort of. That's an interesting question. A lot of doctors now are calling it hereditary anxiety. And to put that straight, first of all, we can't catch anxiety. So if we have somebody in the family who's very, very anxious or very, very panicky, other people around them can model or pattern that behavior. So I'm sure for me, I didn't go through any trauma, but my mother was really anxious. And I'm sure that's why I ended up with an anxiety issue all those years ago, and that I just patterned what my mother did. And we have seen clients where the father in the family has come in to have a small anxiety issue, and then a few months later to see the daughter come in, but we could see the patterns, the speech patterns, the eye moving patterns. And we said, "Are you the daughter of such and such?" And it is interesting that we can pattern that from people. Now we can't actually catch it, despite what the doctors are saying to us. However, we have seen people who've caught a cold and then got anxious, or had COVID and then got anxious. And this can relate to that sometimes when we catch different bugs and things, that it changes the gut biome. And we know the gut biome is massively linked to mental health. So some people say, yes, I got certainly anxious after I caught COVID. But then we've also got to look at, was it all this sort of negative pressure that we got with COVID and lockdown as well?
Would you say that like the news and everything that you were watched as well had an influence on that then?
Certainly. So I was listening to something recently, and it was talking about stress stacking, and it just means so an interesting way is when we sleep at night, our eyes move back and forwards with REM, rapid eye movement, and we believe that's the brain learning from everything of that day. And it's interesting that that continues for an hour or two after we get up. But one of the things that can interrupt that is, again, blue light from screens. But then if we get up and the first thing we do is look at that screen, we're stopping that process from happening. But then usually we're looking at some negative news, what happened with the wars, what happened with Brexit, what's happening with politics. And it's thought that by the time we've done that 20 or 30 times by lunchtime, we've really pushed an awful lot of stress into the system, even if we're not really aware of it. And then doing that all day, again, we do see people who look at their phones right up until when they go to bed. That can disrupt sleep and cause panic issues as well. So certainly all of this programming, all of this brainwashing, all of this negativity really doesn't help us. And this is where an awful lot of our clients have created little routines. One of my favorites, and we've taught this on, was a lady who just set a half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the evening to check her Facebook and other social media, and she switched it off the rest of the time. And that made such a difference to her. That was really unbelievable.
Oh, that's amazing. And that I suppose that sort of links in with the unconscious and conscious mind as well. And your brain is constantly thinking of, and you're not really aware of it at the same time,
Mhm.
but your brain is still thinking about what's happening on the news. So like COVID times, oh, there's COVID around and stuff like that, which will ultimately make somebody more anxious and potentially not make someone want to go out.
So certainly, so a great client example. We had a lovely lady came to us some years ago, um, and when she had her anxiety and her panic attacks, she had to run to the bathroom, and she'd be stuck on the bathroom floor for about 2 hours, sadly with stuff coming out of both ends. And we worked with her, and we quickly got that down, and it stopped. And then a few weeks later, she rang us back up and said, "I can't believe this. this has started again. This happened last night. And I went through everything. We went through the nutrition. She was doing her exercises, and we couldn't find anything wrong. But then the following week, she rang us up and said it happened again, but just on this one night, and then a third night and a fourth one. So I spent some time with her picking it apart. And on the night this was happening, she wasn't watching the television, but she was sitting reading a book while her husband was watching a horrible murder mystery type thing. And we just said, I want you to try this. Just go and sit in the kitchen and close the door. And it stopped. And all we can put that down to was that even though she wasn't directly watching it, she was probably hearing this unconsciously, and it was pushing her stress levels or anxiety levels up and causing that problem. And it is interesting that a lot of people, when they come to us for anxiety, they're not aware of the triggers, and we do a little exercise to help them with that. But it can be certain people. It's You probably know you can be around certain people at certain times, and they just push your anxiety levels through the roof, but you're not always aware of it.
Definitely. And I think that's interesting as well because I read a study once actually when I was doing one of my assignments for uni and basically the aim was to find out whether anxious people liked watching horror movies or didn't like watching horror movies. But they found that most anxious people found that they liked watching anxious movies, like horror movies, I mean, because they could control that anxiety and they could
Interesting.
stop it at any time.
That's really interesting. And there's a couple of ways you could view that. So, one is quite often people with anxiety find a release from it by being distracted by something else. So, by sitting and watching the telly, they're not focusing on the internal signals of, as I've got anxiety. But definitely for me, I like scary sort of supernatural type stuff, but I don't like murderous horror blood type movies that actually does make me feel a little bit anxious. And we were watching something the other week, and it was absolutely gory after a friend had said, "Oh, this was really nice." It's kind of I switched it off and just didn't want to watch it. But I suppose it comes back to again, different people react in different ways.
Definitely, and I suppose it depends on the individual circumstance, and that study doesn't depend on everyone. And
Hmm.
I think it was done in America as well, which also leads to like, is it Western or Eastern sort of differences
Hmm.
or anything like that as well? Because there's also like culture playing a part in anxiety as well. Um, and it nicely goes into what we're going to talk about next, which is going to be the short-term and long-term effects. So, would you be able to explain about that, please?
So the long-term effects and short-term effects of panic attacks is that that puts a lot of stress on the system. We see that the nervous system, oh, sorry, first of all, the immune system goes down. People who are anxious a lot seem to experience a lot more coughs and colds. So it seems to take the immune system down. I have seen some cancer studies, not wanting to scare people, but I think cancer rates are higher in people who are constantly in a state of stress. And it would be very, very similar with a lack of sleep. If we do not sleep properly, studies are now saying we need 8 or 9 hours a day. And again, if that doesn't happen, we don't seem to live as long, and it seems to make things worse. However, years ago, one of the first personal development books I got into actually stated people who had 6 hours worth of sleep seemed to live longer than people who had more. And this is one of the problems with the studies is for everyone that says this, there's another one that says that. And I think you've got to go and try it and see how that makes you feel. Sometimes for me, I love doing 6 hours worth of sleep and getting down the gym. But if it's been a tough week, sometimes I just do sleep that little bit longer.
Definitely, and I suppose that again depends on individual differences, and I suppose it depends on everyday personal preference as well, because I sort of think if you don't have enough sleep, it sort of puts both physical and mental sort of strain on your body as well. Um, and like how you go about your day as well, because like depending on how much sleep I get, certainly it depends on like each day and how much it affects us. And I mean, Alexa's talking, so you must be able to hear that. Um, but yeah, that's really distracting me. So basically, with the sleep and it sort of like with the how much you live long, it depends on the person. And I read something a couple of weeks ago saying if somebody is sleeping after 10 or 11 p.m., they're basically killing themselves because of how much strain it gets on their physical and mental health. But then again, they might not wake up until like 8 a.m. And that would be like a good amount of sleep anyway. So it depends on the person.
It does. So yes, the studies seem to confirm that people who do shift work, who sort of work through the night, seem to be more likely to certain illnesses and cancers. There's also a bit of a change on our circadian rhythms because again, we've just had the clocks changed, and that's put me a little bit out of kilter. I know a lot of people are complaining that the pets are still wanting to be fed at the same time and don't understand the change. But I also think there's a major difference as well on where we are in life at our age. It seems to be people who are more elderly, who've got nothing to do, don't seem to sleep as much. But I think it can change because many years ago, when I used to run the mobile disco business, I would start doing 2 or 3 shows a day from November right the way through to the end of January. We don't seem to have the same levels now. And on some of those days, I was doing 3 shows and moving gear about and surviving on 1 or 2 hours worth of sleep. And by the end of January, I felt amazing. I felt really good. But then trying to get back into that normal rhythm was very, very difficult. And I used to love driving around at night in the dark and sort of living that nightlife, but I couldn't do that today. Once sort of kids come along and relationships, you've got to try and fit back in. But again, I think it's very individual where you're in life, what your type's like. Some people I know just absolutely love being around at night, seem to wake up. And then I'm sure there's ADHD and autism also comes to there in the mix. But again, I can't see a clear pattern with our autistic clients, and that some seem to do really well at night on no sleep, and some really need a lot more sleep.
Yeah, and it depends on like hormone levels as well with the dopamine and other things like that as well. I've seen a study, you actually do this in A-level psychology, and I can't remember the name to save my life, but he's basically the main study was to study exogenous cycles. It's basically the circadian rhythm, and basically. It's all about a cave, somebody going in a cave, and there's no light, no clock, no nothing, basically to tell him the time. And he was living in darkness for about, I feel like I thought it was 5 to 7 days. It's quite a famous study. And basically, he wanted to see if the effects were massive when living in darkness, basically. But there is arguments that it's only one person that done it. And
Hmm.
so there was another study afterwards, and I can't remember the outcome of that. But it's kind of really interesting, and I wish I would remember his name. He was a Frenchman, and I can't remember his name because he's got quite of like a French name, if you would like. Um, so you can never remember his name. But I find it really interesting on how they studied that. But it was quite a long time ago as well. And it's still famous now. But again, things change over time because job roles change and stuff like that. And it's different on every person. But yeah.
Yeah, be interesting to dig that up and maybe explore that in a bit of detail. So interestingly, recently somebody showed me a study that said years ago in the hospitals they'd have sort of a big conservatory, and they would go and wheel the patients in to sit in the sun, which they saw as one of the most important parts of people healing from operations. And a recent study came up and said that people recover quicker in wards that have more windows than ones that are less. And this is both on a physical side and a mental health side. And it seems that we're taking the role of sunlight far too lightly, and that it's not just the UV rays and the ultraviolet and everything else that goes on. Is again, people who get out and walk once or twice a day in the sunshine feel much better. But then there's a lot of people suffer with the SAD syndrome because they're not getting enough of this natural sunlight, and why these sunlight lamps seem to be becoming very popular lately.
That's really interesting. So are there any therapies to help somebody with this?
So if it's something like a panic attack, so some years ago we had a lady who used to wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and the only way she could stop the panic attack was to run round the garden at 2 or 3 in the morning in a nightie to stop that panic attack from happening, which was quite physical and violent for her. And there's a little exercise that we do called the bilateral exercise. And this is where you just need an orange or a ball. And the idea is you just want to get this ball and throw it from hand to hand like this. And at the same time, you want to stare ahead and breathe and sing in your head, left brain, right brain, left brain, right brain. And the reason why this works is it changes the pattern that's going on with a panic attack to increase blood flow either side of the amygdala and push those electrical signals in. And for most of our clients, within 2 to 3 minutes of doing that little exercise, those panic attacks stop within 2 to 3 minutes. It's a nice way to interrupt it. But then if we do that every time we have a panic attack, it works really nicely, and that the frequency of them come down. But that is in combination of us working on that anxiety or stress and depression, because again, when those levels get too high, that's why we have panic attacks. Something else that really helps with sleep is to look at our diet. So we know that serotonin and melatonin are really important. And interestingly, this week, they're now linking serotonin and melatonin supplements with heart attacks. So it seems to be when we take the supplement version, it causes problems. Now, in order for humans to have enough serotonin and melatonin, again, we need to get out in the sunlight. We need to be exercising. We need to be noticing the blues and the greens. But then also we need all the right foods, and these can be things like bananas, a handful of pistachio nuts, mashed and baked potatoes without dairy products. Cherries are really good as well, and a lot of other fruit and veg. And if we eat a nice healthy diet, it really helps us to sleep when also taking that down. However, working on that anxiety is really important. It's just worth bringing that down because it just calms the whole nervous system. And one of the things we do know is that if there's any problems with the digestive system, such as digestive issues, food intolerances, candida, lack of vitamins or minerals, if the gut biome's out or the hormones are out, that can stop that melatonin, serotonin production, which makes anxiety much higher. And we have found with a lot of clients recently that when we get those food intolerances out of the system, that those sleep and those panic and those anxiety issues seem to drop away really nicely.
That's really interesting. And have you read anything towards things to do with blue light and how like your mental health and specifically sleep can be affected by that, and how red light can help that?
Ah, that's interesting. So definitely blue light we know from screens, TVs, any sort of devices seem to disrupt sleep and can have a part in panic attacks. And unfortunately, we have so many of these things around us now that are chucking that blue light out. I know on my phone I've permanently got a night light filter on there so it doesn't give out the blue light. But it's finding that nighttime routine to help to bring that down. Now, the red light's interesting, and I need to do more research into this. Um, I have a friend who does acupuncture, and she has both a little red light machine, an infrared machine, and she has an infrared sauna. And I've seen more and more people using infrared saunas because one is it seems to take down inflammation. And if there's inflammation in the gut or the brain, it can cause all these issues. But I went for this lovely acupuncture treatment a couple of days ago, and she makes sure she gets this red light and she pointed at your tummy, which I thought was really strange the first time I do it. But it really does make you feel good. But there's the other one is again the SAD disorder, and that people who don't get natural sunlight seem to get a bit more depressed or anxious during the winter. So there's a lot more to it, and I think we need a lot more research.
That's really interesting. And there's a family actually on YouTube that are really into like health and health benefits and stuff. And they always have red light around. Um and that's like to do with the lamps and everything. Um and that's supposed to help with um making your melatonin um be produced.
Production. Yeah, production.
So yeah,
Yeah,
is that
I can imagine because it is interesting that you do get different depression and anxiety levels in different countries. And I'd imagine a lot of it's to do with sunlight, but then there's a lot of other factors because there's lots of different diets. It's like we know that in Russia and Poland, they have much more likely issues of having alcohol problems because vodka's so cheap over there. But then we also know that people who eat a cup of red cabbage per day seem to protect the bowel. Isn't it interesting that just a cup of red cabbage really takes inflammation in the bowel and the rest of the body? In fact, we've been working with a client with severe IBS, and we've got her eating red cabbage like you wouldn't believe, and it's made a massive difference both to the IBS but also the mental health issues. So that's the problem. There's a lot of different factors, and it's trying to study this data because sometimes stuff's going on that we don't even know is happening.
yeah, it's really interesting. And I actually did a case study in my A levels as well, who had IBS, and also they were a student and they weren't sleeping correctly as well. So I had to write about how IBS can be impacted on the sleep and stuff like that. So getting a good sleep white I can't speak. Sleep cycle can help that. Um so yeah.
Yeah, IBS is massively linked to anxiety. It's about 50% of the time we see both of those there, and people say that their IBS gets much worse when their anxiety does. But sometimes the IBS is causing the anxiety. A regular call we get every couple of weeks is people have anxiety about finding public toilets. If they coughed, if they don't know where there's a public toilet. And in fact, some years ago, we had a lovely lady came to us. She'd met this guy, gone for a meal, she'd got food poisoning, and she had a major accident as they were driving back. And from that point onward, she kind of had a phobia that she couldn't go on any type of public transport unless she knew where to get off to find toilets. But she's absolutely fine on the train. And that was just that little bit of trauma caused that problem. But then, as we worked with her, within a couple of days, she was driving up and down the country and didn't have a problem. But it's amazing how, again, they're now saying we've got brain cells in our gut, in our stomach, and that's massively connected to the brain. And trying to just treat one or the others makes the job much harder. If we do it holistically, it works so much quicker.
Oh wow, that's really interesting. And I eventually found remember the name, and he's called Sifra. I
Sifra.
don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but it's spelled Siffre. So yeah, I'm glad I remembered that because that would be booking me all night.
I'll go and have a look at that. Yeah.
It's really interesting and I would definitely recommend. Um, so are there any specific types, um, not types, specific tips on to overcome the um anxiety, panic and sleep?
So, yeah, I think the first thing is ask yourself, what is it you're doing every day to reduce your anxiety, stress, and panic? Even when I work with other therapists and they do this to me, if ever we've got a challenge, it's always, what are you doing to make a difference with this? Because if we don't do anything, it doesn't work. And basically, the best things I can recommend is get up and move. If we've got anxiety, it's usually caused by cortisol levels being too high. And just a 20-minute walk or getting down the gym really makes a difference. I do suggest when you're in the gym, listen to some music you really love or listen to some positive development or good podcasts, not negative stuff. The more you can exercise during the day, the better. A lot of people now are going out for a quick walk after each meal because it's a great way of losing weight. People feel so much better that way. Meditation is brilliant. If you find one that you really like and you find easy, that's a good thing to do. I prefer over that self-hypnosis. I teach self-hypnosis to people all the time, and this is a great way of you deciding what you want to happen, either in improvements or changes, taking yourself into trance. And the best way I can put that is when you come out, you're rather like a large rhinoceros, and that you've set your goals, you've got a really thick skin, and you go charging through the day. And actually, self-hypnosis was the thing that helped me to get rid of my stammer when I had problems. I think everybody should be taught that in school. And then eating lots of good vitamin C from fruit, not from supplements. You know, apples, oranges, bananas, grapes, kiwi fruits especially are really good for sleep. And then just looking after your mental health. And if you have got an anxiety, stress, depression, or panic issue, go and see a therapist as soon as you can, because we keep seeing people who've put it off for 10, 20, or 30 years. And that makes it much harder and much more expensive if it is something we can fix. We have turned a couple of people away last week who were so severe. It wasn't something we could take on. It's got to be medication. But then once you start taking medication, that can change all sorts of stuff. And especially medication can change sleep patterns.
Definitely. And I think when you listen to music at the gym, especially your own music, so I tend to just stick my favorite playlist on, Benson Boone. And basically it sort of helps both mentally but also physically as well, because say you're on a treadmill and you're doing interval training. So you walk for a minute, then um you run for 30 seconds. So it helps us, so like a timer, but like an
Hmm.
unconscious timer, instead of like, oh, I've got to do this like 5 seconds.
Hmm.
You're not counting yourself specifically. And I think that really helps instead of the gym music, because all of a sudden, because they do the radio instead
Hmm.
of like a normal playlist, and sometimes it's like Adele, like someone you loved or something like that. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to listen to that when I'm running. It doesn't really sound very good when you're running, does it? And you want to like sort of like listen to like an upbeat song when you're running. So I think a playlist helps with that, or even create your own specific playlist that helps you go along like that. Um, and yeah, um. But oh, I can't remember what else I was going to say there.
Well, to pick up a good point, that's interesting because music massively changes our mood. So if I'm in the car and Motorhead Ace of Spades come in, I have to turn it off because I've got a habit of putting the foot down and going too fast. But then years ago, so my dad, who was a psychiatric nurse and director, he hated blues music. He thought it made people depressed. But actually, I find it the most uplifting thing you can listen to. And sometimes slow music can motivate you, but it's either you move into the rhythms of that music, and there can be the rhythm of the drums or the bass or the guitar or the voice. And sometimes slow music really motivates people in the gym, and sometimes it can make you feel happy or it can make you feel depressed, especially if a track has an emotional attachment, an anchor. Is that quite often I can go out and I hear a song and I'll think of somebody from the past or my parents or a good time we had. So again, it's looking at that music and notice how it makes you feel. One of the tricks I say with clients all the time is what's your favorite bit of music for getting you up and moving? And then put that on first thing in the morning. So if people struggle to go to the gym, I say, why are you putting your gym pants on and your gym shoes? Listen to that bit of music, and it makes that process so much easier. And it's about listening to this and finding how it works. And in fact, there's an amazing guy, Richard Bandler. He's one of the co-creators of NLP, and he does this whole lecture about when he goes on a date, the music that he's playing in his head. And instead of being a squeaky little guy worrying about his tie, he's got the theme from the Dam Busters coming in. He's got the timpani drums at full volume. So then when he walks in that restaurant, he's got the confidence, he's got the posture. And it is really amazing how just something like a little bit of music can trigger us to be a totally different person.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I've experienced that for myself actually with studying music and mood and psychology. I found it really interesting to see the different studies, and I've also implemented it on my own life as well. And seeing like dramatic changes just by a specific album or specific playlist to listen to, it massively changes it. Um but yeah, so is there any like breathing techniques or anything like that for specific like panic attacks and stuff?
Yeah, so there's a lot of them out there, and I'd say be careful with anything that tells you to hold your breath because there's a lot of anxiety experts out there, but holding your breath is the one thing we see that seems to cause panic attacks. It's not the same for everybody, but it's just something we keep away from. So one of the ones we work on is 7-11 breathing. And this is where you'd slowly breathe in through the nose. We need to breathe in through the nose and out through the nose for about 7 seconds. And then we want to do is we want to change that so we breathe out for 11. Because when we feel anxious and panicky, we usually breathe in for maybe three and out for one or two. And that pushes way too much CO2 into the system and causes fight or flight. But if we breathe in for 7 and out for 11, it calms people down. It stimulates the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic nervous system. And it seems to just take us into this nice calm pool. And as part of our first session with clients usually is we teach a really good exercise that incorporates that so that several times a day they scan the system, notice how they're feeling, and change their breathing. There's other breathing methods out there like the box breathing, but as I mentioned, holding your breath with our clients seems to cause those panic attacks. But it varies. 7-Eleven is really popular with the Americans because it's the name of a store over there, 7-Eleven. Whereas more in the UK, people like to think of breathing for 4 and out for 7. And I suppose, again, it's just how you represent that with your counting. But again, breathing slowly through the nose. There is a correlation between breathing with your mouth open seems to dehydrate the body and is much more likely to cause panic attacks. And on that note as well, we need to stay hydrated. Now, most people in the UK that I meet don't drink enough clean water. And there's a part in the brain that if it's dehydrated, triggers anxiety and panic like you wouldn't believe. So 2 to 3 liters of clean water or herbal teas a day is a major step for panic and anxiety. But then if you're drinking anything that's a diuretic or anything that's toxic, it takes that water away. And this is why coffee, as much as it's really nice, it's like alcohol. You drink one, you pay out two. Great trick. But we need to top up that water. And it's amazing. And the amount of clients we see who just don't drink enough water. I'm actually sitting there in the clinic watching them when they come in to see how much water they drink within 30 minutes. And the rule I was told years ago by a lovely guy called Dr. Joe Esposito is that we need to be going for a pee every 45 minutes. And then the key is we need to stop drinking that much water about 4 o'clock so we get a good night's sleep. But yeah, he talks about going for a pee every 45 minutes and that it should be so clear you can read a newspaper through it. But I'd advise people not to do that.
That's really interesting.
Mm.
And are there any herbal teas that you would specifically recommend?
Yes, so we know coffee is a problem with anxiety and sleep, but it's not just the caffeine. So green tea has thiamine in, it's got some B vitamins in, and we're finding out more and more studies now to say that helps us to relax from anxiety and helps with the sleep. And I recommend getting a good brand, not a cheap supermarket brand. I love Clipper, it's a really nice brand. So green tea is really good. Chamomile tea is really good. Yogi, which is a brand, Echinacea tea, seems to be really good for anxiety. And then there's various different sleep teas that we can see on the market. Celestial, I think, do a nighttime tea. Heath and Heather have an organic nighttime tea. Things like valerian and lavender also really work. Now, I'm not a herbalist by any means, but I do know quite a few. And actually, they say that herbs can be very powerful with all of this. But it's nice to do it as a tea because you can't overdose on them, and it's a much easier way of getting it into the system.
That's really interesting, and thank you for sharing. And it's been lovely having you on here.
Thank you.
So, if you have any questions, please do leave it in the comments section, or if you want it more private, you can directly message me on Instagram or email me at healthvision216@gmail.com. And Mark,
Yeah, if people want to get in touch with us, we've got some free resources. The first one is a free anxiety relief pack, which includes a really powerful hypnotic audio that people can listen to at night to help with sleep and to reduce anxiety. We've got an anxiety ebook, which has got some breathing exercises, and we've even got some little explainer videos which tell you exactly what anxiety is and some ways to bring it down. And you can find that at escapeanxietynow.com. And also, if you search for Escape Anxiety Now on Newcastle Hypnotherapy, we've got a YouTube channel full of these. And then, if also you were interested in working with us privately, I'll give Amy a link where you can have a free assessment call. We'll spend about 20-30 minutes on the phone looking at your problems, seeing if we can help, and then we can answer all of your questions. And for most people who do that, we can sort things out in 4 to 6 weeks.
great, thank you, and thank you everyone for listening today, and I hope you enjoy it as well. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Bye.